Sup, freaks? This episode was brought to you by our good friends at River. The last few months have shown us that it's really hard to find a reliable partner in the Bitcoin space that can get you access to Bitcoin, help you purchase Bitcoin, help you mine Bitcoin, and help you send that Bitcoin to cold storage. Third-party dependencies like Prime Trust are security holes. Luckily, with River, they built their whole exchange. They built their infrastructure. They built their wallets. They built their multi-sig cold storage. Their Bitcoin that is held on their exchange is backed one-to-one in that multi-sig cold storage, though they do encourage you to take self-custody of your Bitcoin. If you DCA, if you dollar cost average, you're not going to pay any fees on those buys. Other exchanges have insane fees and spreads on DCA purchases. You can avoid that using River. Go to river.com/TFTC, set up that account today, and pick your last Bitcoin partner, the most reliable one. River.com/TFTC. Enjoy this episode.
We're live now. I was asking you a question. Tuur and I had a fascinating discussion. What was that? After the takeover event? Or no, it was the debate series. It was after the debate.
There was the debate, and then we went, we had dinner with some people.
Yeah. We were talking about ancient structures, whether or not ancient aliens exist. Pretty topical considering what's going on Capitol Hill right now.
Yeah.
I saw you were tweeting about it. What's your take?
Yeah, about UAPs/UFOs. Like there's this whistleblower, David Grush, who's been arguing, and he had the highest security clearance. So he's a guy who was really, and I think he was also on the UAP task force. So they had like a kind of like a new-ish organ that was going to investigate what's going on. And so basically he was poking around, and the reason why he became a whistleblower, according to him, is that basically he was refused access, and at the same time he got in touch or was approached by a whole bunch of people that claimed to have, like, you know, personal experience with they call it non-human intelligence, so like either crafts or pilots or both, and so he became a whistleblower. And then eventually, this is maybe like only a month ago, I think he did like the whistleblower interview. And then now today they had the first ever, what do you call it?
Congressional hearing. Congressional
hearing, yeah, where there were Grush and two other, like they were two Navy pilots, just pilots, military pilots who testified and were subject to and so they were all under oath, and so there's an additional layer of credibility in a way that, you know, if all of them make these claims, like now they would be at risk of perjuring themselves as they're actually lying. So, you know, that kind of adds to the credibility of this whole story.
Yeah. I'm torn.
And so he's saying that not only are there, you know, craft that have been retrieved, but that there's actually secret government programs to try and reverse engineer the technology, and that he, like, one of the incidents he mentioned goes back to Mussolini's Italy. So in the 1930s, apparently, or, you know, allegedly, there was a craft there that was then retrieved to the U.S.
Yeah, and there was theories that the Nazis had an alien craft. We're trying to reverse engineer it as well. And that's what I've got my skeptical lens on for this. Aliens is a great psyop to bring about the world government. And somebody brought a good point up on Twitter earlier today, which is like, we have autonomous pilotless drones here on Earth, and we're probably 1,000 years away from interstellar travel. Like, why? If we have this rudimentary technology and pilotless drones, why would they ever actually get in their aircraft to travel between stars, galaxies, whatever it may be?
Wait, what would they get in? What do you mean with get in?
Like, if there was actually pilots recovered.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't they just send autonomous?
Oh, why wouldn't they just send drones? Well, also the theory, again, like, I'm not very well versed. I only been studying this for, I don't know, a few months. But the most dominant theory seems to be that the pilots are part of the drones, because, like, they don't have any reproductive, like, they're like the gray aliens. Like, that is kind of the cliche, you know, imagery that we know, like, according to some of these alleged witnesses that are seen to be relatively close to the people that are now been testifying, and some of them totally aren't close, but I mean, at least seems some of them are, that the gray aliens who are known to be pilots as well of these drones, that they themselves are basically manufactured because they don't have reproductive organs. They don't seem to be able to survive for very long. It's just like, you know, using biological materials, you can create a being that's a lot more intelligent, or a machine that's a lot more intelligent than if you were to just, you know, build a craft. So
Oh, crap.
that's the idea.
Yeah. So this is a developing story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like, I kind of want to know about the whistleblower claims. Like, you know, he's claiming that there's programs, secret programs that were illegally funded, etc. And so I'm just curious to see where this is going to go.
Yeah. I know Matthew Pines from the Bitcoin Policy Institute is very scared by all this.
He seems to take it seriously, yeah.
Yeah. Like, to the point where he's like, the aliens might wipe out humanity in a few years. I'm like, all right, if that's the case, I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, if this whole story is true, then, you know, then maybe we should be talking about ancient aliens. Like, maybe they've been around for thousands of years, and they're just kind of like, they just have access to an extra dimension that we don't have access to, so we never get to see them unless they choose to expose themselves to us. So they're kind of like living in the shadow side of Earth, and, you know, and in a way we've maybe always coexisted.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the theory of the Anunnaki that we're actually...
oh yeah, aren't like that we part alien or something?
Yeah, that the aliens came to Earth and used their DNA to create humans, and it's one of the ancient alien theories.
Yeah. Actually, I never had National Geographic growing up, and so I only know some of the memes, but I don't really know the ancient aliens theory.
Yeah, I think that the most recent Aliens movie was based off the Anunnaki. It was them seeding life on planet Earth, but. We digress. We came here to talk about Bitcoin.
Sure. Sure.
No, I mean, it's been a while since we caught up. We caught up on the show. It had to be 2 or 3 years ago. Probably 3.
Maybe longer. Wasn't it like...
It was at BitBlock Boom. You were on your way out of town. You were about to get on a bus.
Wasn't it in a hotel lobby?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe 2018 or 19, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a while. A lot has obviously happened since then.
Your show has grown a lot, tremendously.
Well, it's crazy what happens when you start talking about Bitcoin. People get attracted to it, and slowly over time.
And when you keep at it also.
Yes.
And we don't all of a sudden have an announcement that you're joining the team of this new Professor Coin, and, you know, or do like a whiny rage quit. Like, if you actually keep at it, like, yeah.
Consistency is key. And that's actually part of what I wanted to discuss today, because that's one thing I've been and get your thoughts on. Like, one thing I've been having a lot of conversations, and whether it's Bitcoin's inability to materialize as a fully monetized store of value medium of exchange off the bat over the last 15 years. People typically look at Bitcoin, they say, oh, well, it's not a good store of value. Look at the volatility. It's not a good medium of exchange. Look at how expensive it is on chain and how few transactions you can do. And then similarly with the Lightning Network, launched 5 years ago, and people wanted it to do what it was marketing it could do out of the box. But 5 years in, for Lightning particularly, it seems like we've gotten to the point of maturation where there's good dev tools to build on. There's a robust implementation environment that people can choose from, and it's getting easier and easier to implement Lightning into commercial applications, whatever it may be. And I think this just highlights the fact that we're building many different cathedrals here with Bitcoin and the layers on top of it. And it's just going to take time and effort. And I think what I've been having conversations and pitching Bitcoin to people, like, in my mind, this is the best time ever from a risk adjusted perspective to get into Bitcoin, due to the maturation of everything that's going on at the protocol level and at Lightning and other second layers. Then on top of that, it seems like the Overton window is shifting and Bitcoin is becoming more palatable. Plus,
right now, there's no euphoria around Bitcoin. So from a price point of view, it's not that risky either. So I do think that's why, you know, I put out the report. I think now's a good time to really look at Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that's what you're famous for with your reports is you drop them typically in the middle of the bear market when it's like, all right, here's the signal.
Yeah, my wish is always that we start seeing like the uptick, and that like that's where I put it out, right? It's like right when we're starting to actually get into a new bull market. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the goal.
And so you released your last one, was it like 6 months ago at this point?
No, more recently. It was end of May, I think. End of May? So Bitcoin was, I remember, $26,000.
Okay. So only $3,000 above that right now, hovering at 29.
Yeah.
So what have you seen? Why did you feel end of May was the right time to release your report?
I put quite a bit of work in it. So I think I started actually writing when we were right at the bottom pretty much. Like I think it was like 17, 18,000. And usually my writing is kind of like rage fueled. It's like, I just see so much like despondency and like people just like, and there's these in the depths of the bear market, like, people stop engaging, like they stop even talking about Bitcoin. Like they kind of feel ashamed to bring it up to family and then there's also sometimes like some crazy stories that don't make sense. And so usually there is that for me. And then I maybe part of why I get mad is like, even I feel some like doubt creep in. It's like, oh, is this one going to be different? And so then it's like, all right, let's just, get my stuff together and like try to really make the case and address all the FUD, right? So that's what I just tried to do is like, all right, let's look at all the objections that are floating around and assess them and then see, do they actually matter? And then also look at like, well, what are some potential tailwinds and what are the whales doing? For example, you can actually look at the blockchain and see whether whales are capitulating or not. And usually whales they just hodl all the way through the bear. Like the only times when you actually see serious old coins moving on the chain is when there is exuberance, when you have these massive rises and the old guys, the OGs, a lot of whom we probably don't even know. People have thousands of Bitcoin. They basically start seeing that a lot of people are getting involved that don't understand it. Like they're basically going to be the weak hands. That's not the case now. Like whoever's, getting into Bitcoin today, the vast majority, I think, has a reasonable idea about what Bitcoin actually is.
Why do you say that?
Just because the price is way down, and usually it's people that have heard about it in the past. And, in a way, every new bull market starts with smart money getting in at the beginning, and then later you get more like retail involvement, people that are more like trend followers rather than the trend makers.
Yeah. Do you think the cycles as they've played out in the past will continue?
Yeah, I think so. Just because of human emotion and because people they make models and then they think the model is true, but then because enough people start thinking that defies it, right? Because then you overshoot whatever the model predicts because everyone thinks, oh, this is the easiest thing, right? It's going to keep going up forever. Like the super cycle, like that was one of those ideas.
Thank you, Suzu.
Even I bought into it for a while. I was like, the S curve, at some point you got to go vertical. And anyway, so, I think it's human nature. Like the cycles are us reacting to Bitcoin. It's nothing innate to Bitcoin.
And so again, going back to like the development at the protocol and layers above it, like, do you think the progress that's been made there is setting us up for a unique cycle, especially when you combine that with, like, I just got off of Spaces with RFK Jr. and he admitted at the end that he owns Bitcoin. So like, it seems like there's a coalescence of productive building that's been going on, making Bitcoin more accessible, more useful. And then this narrative, it's sort of lining up next year with the halving in the presidential election that seems like it could be a good tailwind. Yeah, there is definitely the first time ever that there's been so much like political buzz around Bitcoin. Like all of a sudden, Bitcoin is an item on the election agenda. Like we had, I think David Bailey said, like, weren't there like 4 presidential candidates at the latest Miami Bitcoin conference? Like, that's crazy. So, and then at the same time, yeah, we do have Lightning, which in my mind
it debunks the idea that somehow Bitcoin is elitist, right? It's like, oh, you can only do 3 transactions per second, therefore, or like, you know, however high the fees would be, people would use that as being like, oh, fees are $2, like it's only for the elites. And so with Lightning, you could say, well, no, right? I mean, it's ready, regardless of whether and how much people are going to use Lightning in the next cycle. Just the fact that it's there and you can figure it out if you want to, I think it's super powerful, because a lot of the coins that were created in the 2017 cycle were just riding on that FUD wave of like, oh, Bitcoin, it has too few transactions. And look at our coin, you know, we have 100 transactions per second. It's so ridiculous looking back, but that's how they marketed a lot of these coins.
I believe Solana can do 100,000 a second.
Oh, wow, man.
But eventually it will break and they'll have to restart it.
Do you know of any good Solana podcasts I could be on?
I think Kyle Samani's in the city. We can go find him and see if he's willing to talk. But that's another interesting question. Like stepping away from Bitcoin and looking at the crypto cycles. Like, do you think they're as pronounced moving forward as they have been in the past? Are they losing narrative steam?
I think, yeah, I mean, I guess I can't hide. I'll have a little bit of glee thinking about this theory that, because I'm going to reveal my theory. But so the mantra has been alts are back. Like that is they're going to come back at some point. It's just a matter of when, you know, alts are back. And so they're trying to revive the scam coin cycle over and over. And so far, in a way, they've been right. But one of these cycles, they're going to be very, very wrong, I think. And I'm kind of speculating that this coming cycle, people may be wrong that alts are back because we have so much regulatory scrutiny. Like, so basically the on-ramps are getting, you know, more and more shut down, and these scam coins are not decentralized, right? And so that means if you're going after the fraudsters, like, they actually can't keep running the coin oftentimes, or not keep it functional at least. So that's one headwind for the altcoins. Then there is the fact that Bitcoin actually is scaling. So all the narratives are the narratives that were justifying these coins are being incorporated in the Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin is scaling, Bitcoin is having smart contracts. You'll be able to do asset issuance on top of Bitcoin. There's just so much stuff is clearly happening on top of Bitcoin. And then I think also just the world is becoming a little more wary that, you know, how many scam coins can you live through and then still be gullible for the next one? Like, at some point, people just get tired of it and they're like, you know what? No, I'm not going to buy your new coin. So yeah, maybe it really won't happen the next time around.
Yeah, I think.
Because you can do plenty of scams on top of Bitcoin too, right? I'm not saying scams are going to go away, but, you know, specifically scam coins, maybe it'll be more like a scammy Bitcoin startups, and then they sell equity in those, or, you know, who knows.
What was Mersha Popescu's scammy Bitcoin startup? He started like an equity exchange. I
mean, I think I never, well, for a while, because I had my newsletter back then, and I was looking at Bitcoin denominated securities like way 2012, 13. I remember, well, like, there were a few that were legitimate, you know, like Satoshi Dice, Eric Voorhees', you know, gambling website actually was a real operation. It was profitable, and he did an IPO, and yeah, that one was running on Mercea's, what was it again? I forget the name of his exchange.
No, I forget what it was.
Yeah, but so I think maybe some of the other ones were more scammy. And then, I mean, there was ASIC Miner. That was a big one. It was one of the first, because they had the specialized mining chips early on, and they went public, and they had a guy called Fried Cat who would just give these very detailed reports from the inside about how the company was doing, and some of these, and the stock went up to 5 Bitcoin a share. And then something went wrong and it just disappeared. I think a bunch of people lost money on that. Yeah. So that was, I think those times could come back where we actually get some real DeFi going, and then, you know, it's going to be a matter of trying to not walk into these traps.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the ability of the scam coins to draw people in is driven by impatience, where, like I said earlier, they want Bitcoin to be the fully monetized store of value with layers that are enabling medium of exchange at scale out of the box. But it takes time to build this stuff. And I think this cycle, building on what you just said, we're gonna see that there were good ideas in the past whose time has finally come because of the infrastructure that's built out. A great example is this thing right here, the 21Co computer. Remember back in the day?
Is that Balaji's computer?
Yeah.
This thing?
Yeah, you can pick it up.
Whoa.
Remember the idea of the machine payable web behind this?
I've never seen a physical version of it.
Yeah.
This is like a little Raspberry Pi to run a node on?
It was a little fan. It was a miner. It was
oh, that's from before that. So this is like the 21E6, like their miner. Oh, I see.
Yeah. But again, going back to like ideas whose time have come and actually make sense now, like the whole idea behind 21Co was the machine payable web, like enabling machine payments via microtransactions. And they found out the hard way that probably doesn't work at the protocol level. You can't do that with UTXOs. But now that Lightning exists, like that idea is a very good idea. It just wasn't viable in 2015, 2016. Now with Lightning and what we're seeing coming out of the AI for All hackathon, which is going on right now, led by Fedi and Replit and a bunch of others, like I think it's becoming very obvious, like, oh, this was a great idea. And not until now was it actually viable.
Yeah, you always need both components. It's like one thing to have a great idea, but the timing is just so important. Like that's why the running joke in the comic show Silicon Valley was that Russ Hanneman guy is that he had radio on internet. Like he had basically like, I think he was a parody of Mark Cuban, who had like basically also like sold this idea of like, oh, video streaming in like 1999, way too early, but apparently found some people willing to buy out his company, and then, you know, he was set. So yeah, to me that fits there. And so when you look at the Bitcoin startups today, that's what you have to have in mind. It's like, yeah, there's going to be lots of great ideas, but where are we on timing? Because if you're 5 years early or even 3 years early or 2 years early, you might just burn through all your cash and never launch.
Yeah, and be on the sidelines as you watch somebody take your idea and run with it.
Yeah.
No,
so that's why we need to see minimum viable products that actually generate cash. Like we need to see those things.
In your mind, what are some examples of that you're excited about?
Well, I'm going to be doing more conferences, so I do expect to see more, more startups and get a better look at what's going on. I remember talking to the guys in Miami who have this. It's like a wallet that implements the Miniscript stuff, and so they're like a French company, and they basically empower users to have all these time delays, and so
Liana.
Yeah, Liana, yeah. So I had a demo of them. And so if they can show that they actually start having customers and that there's demand for this and they're building it out as like a service, right, on top of the technology they built, like something like that, it's, that's promising.
Yeah, that particular use case too, thinking about like timing and tailwinds for the next cycle. Like one thing that we've experienced at 1031, talking to high net worth individuals and family offices that want to get into Bitcoin but have paused to do so, is the idea around custody. Like they're smart enough to realize they don't want to hold it all on Coinbase or an exchange, and wise enough to understand that they should do self-custody, but haven't been comfortable with the options at their fingertips to date. There's still like a gap between the one extreme of fully custodied on an exchange and cold storage that they're comfortable with.
And there's a lot of what if questions that couldn't really be answered satisfactorily, where it's like, well, what if, this goes wrong and that goes wrong and that goes wrong. Oftentimes it was like, well, now we ran out of keys in our multisig. Whereas like with the Miniscript stuff, and looks like, I think Fedi is also in that direction. Then it's like, well, you can have an entire multi-sig as a backup, and then it starts over. So you can just build in a bunch of redundancy and the time delays, which is great in itself, because that's the vulnerable part of any theft is is speed. Like all the movies is always like, you know, they're running out of time, like the thieves. And so if you can build in a delay mechanism, all of a sudden you have a way more robust wallet solution or vault solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on top of that, like, not only can those multi-sigs via mini-script degrade into different multi-sig setups, so they can also degrade into like a single sig where you have your nuclear option single sig wallet where it's like, all right, if all else fails, I'll be able to spend from this key.
Yeah. Very powerful. Yeah. But so, you know, when people look at it's interesting, right? How so much of the VC money, I forget the numbers, but I guess the Trumbo Ventures, they actually ran the numbers of what percentage of VC capital went to crypto versus Bitcoin. It was insane, right? It was like 97% or something went to crypto.
Even higher than that. It's like 98, 99%.
Yeah, right. Well, but then again, if you think about, okay, but what were the successful pure Bitcoin startups in the last 12 years? There weren't that many, right? They were mostly Bitcoin mining companies. And they're, you know, a lot of them didn't really need that much external funding. But yeah, a lot of the, like a wallet, how do you monetize a wallet? Like that's hard. And then I think Unchained did a great job of like showing like, yeah, the lending is a real thing. But then the exchanges, they just had to expand their offering and they became crypto exchanges. So yeah, there was that uncomfortable period where actually there just weren't that many startups in Bitcoin that were profitable. There were just some open source projects for a long time.
Yeah. And I think another thing there too is like the price of Bitcoin sort of affects how people or how much people are willing to pay for services. Like I imagine as the price increases and the underlying value of people's Bitcoin holdings increases, they're going to be more and more willing to pay for services that help them either custody, do financial services using their Bitcoin and stuff like that.
I'm laughing because I remember like one of the first quote unquote services I remember encountering being denominated in Bitcoin was the first conference I attended was in London, early 2012. And the Bitcoin Foundation had just been, you know, sprung into life, and they had all these plans, and you could become a member. And I was like, what does it mean to be a member? What is it going to, it's like, oh, but you get to support the cause. And I said, all right. How much is it? And they were like, 50 Bitcoin. It's like $500 at the time. But, and it just, to me, it was like, that's just too much. 50 Bitcoin for membership. So I think, yeah, a lot of people look at it that way. It's like, you know, like, expressed in the most scarce money in the world, a lot of things look very expensive very easily.
Yeah. And as Bitcoin monetizes and the opportunity cost of departing with your Bitcoin decreases, like it makes sense to me intuitively that people are going to be willing to cough up either dollars or sats for services that add value to them.
Yeah, and in a way there was some predatory stuff happening too, because there was so much easy money sloshing around in Silicon Valley, etc. And so there's so much easy VC money, and that went into like a Coinbase and a whatever, like all these, and they were so flush with cash, all these crypto startups, that in a way they were poaching a lot of Bitcoin companies, like customers away from Bitcoin companies, like you know, onboarding people, or all these crypto exchanges with zero fees and stuff. So, you know, if you were a god honest Bitcoin company, it was just hard to compete because, you know, you were not sexy in Silicon Valley to raise money. Like that's why we're seeing these Bitcoin focused VC funds now that actually understand the ecosystem.
Yeah. And another big problem with that era and that mania, if you will, is like they convinced individuals and companies that wanted to focus on Bitcoin to get into shitcoinery because there's pressure from the cap table. Like, hey, you need revenue.
Huge pressure.
Launch this shitcoin.
Yeah.
Transition to Solana.
Yeah. And also if you're an exchange, it's like you, all of a sudden you get all these, they just throw money at you to list their coin. So it's hard to say no to money.
Yeah. What do you think, like, going back to like the regulatory environment and the SEC, how big of an impact do you think they have on the industry? Like, do you think Coinbase is in trouble? Do you think Binance, individual?
I talked to someone in Miami who said that their law firm said that it was a small possibility, but a genuine possibility that Coinbase's assets could get frozen, so that customers would have all their funds stuck at Coinbase. That's how serious this stuff is. So yeah, and Coinbase kind of announced like, oh, we're looking to expand abroad, but it sounds like that's mostly like a story that they're spinning up now, but that was never their bet. Like, they're kind of caught off guard. They didn't expect so much headwind. They thought, like, they were really naive. Like, they're like, oh, but we're the good guys and we just need to make them understand. And they made like a whole documentary about Fred and Brian, I don't know if
Did
you
you watch
saw
that?
I saw some of it. Yeah.
I paid 99 cents to watch it.
Well, yeah. And I think that it really comes from this naive idea of like, but we just are the good guys. How could you be against us? We're trying to be compliant, and you just need to understand that you don't interpret the law correctly. And so I think you rub these SEC people the wrong way that way. If you already have a conclusion and you're kind of, it comes across as arrogant, right? Like, you guys need to just understand the right way of thinking. It's like, I heard that the head of custody at the SEC is like 80 years old, like the chief honcho of who goes over, like, I forget the details, but basically when it comes to making serious decisions about what is custody and what is not, and who's allowed and who's not. So that's what you're dealing with. Like, you're talking 2 generations back, so it's it's tricky. And then of course there's vested interests as well. Like, on the cynical way is like, oh, they're always going to favor their own cronies, and and it's a takeover. And then on the more, and I'm not choosing either one, but the more friendly interpretation is kind of like, they're trying to do the right thing, and there's people that they already trust, and so they're more skeptical of the newbies who, like, come from a world that seems maybe scammy and whatever, and maybe they trust a BlackRock more than they do a Coinbase. But so, yeah, I think all this headwind stuff is serious. I think it's not threatening the Bitcoin yet. I think it's much more about securities regulation. And so a lot of this, people always thought like, oh, but the ICO boom happened. And where are the lawsuits? They were like, kind of like in a cavalier way saying like, if really what all they did was illegal, like, where are the lawsuits? But people forget that after the .com bubble burst, we had lawsuits up to 10 years after the fact, massive lawsuits. So the system is just slow. So we're only like 6 years in right now.
Yeah, that's the other thing, going back to like the naivety of the crypto industry, is the SEC was openly choreographing for years. Like, hey, we're likely going to move. We're going to move slow, but at some point in the future, like, we're going to react to what just happened.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly, Ethereum was a securities offering, like Ripple, I think, are securities. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it just seems pretty straightforward that most of these things just are securities because of the level of centralization and the airdrops and how it was all marketed and clearly there were expectations of profit and all those kind of things. So, and I think it makes sense, to have securities regulation. I think that, or at least if you're going to regulate markets, like, that is an area where I can see having a need for transparency. But then, of course, you have the risk of favoritism and, all those. So I'm not saying it's without problems, but like, fundamentally, I see the distinction between a commodity and a security as a valid one.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in the case of Coinbase and others who are like throwing their arms up, like, I think another thing that's really not playing into their favors, like, the crypto world has very little to show for all the investment, all the pump and dumps that went in. Like, that's steel man, play devil's advocate. In your mind, is there anything of value that is materialized out of that industry, maybe outside of state?
Yeah, because every time people like Bitcoiners make a statement of like, yeah, what have they got to show for it? Then every time there's a few crypto aficionados who come out and be like, oh, what about this and that and that? And then you look into it, and all it is like leverage trading. It's all like financial Duplo or something. It's like, oh, but what about this thing that we made? And it's just like another type of pyramid scheme or a way to trade, not necessarily faster, but more like using this as collateral and then blah, and then that stable coin. And it's all these like shaky constructions that are just financial games that aren't necessarily like, okay, we made transactions this much faster, or we had a smart contract that is so robust, like it's so much better than previous generations. And it's not really about that. It's more, well, with this coin, you got to play with a lot more leverage. So, all right, well, that's just more of the same. We come from that world. The fiat world is all about that. So yeah, there's very little to show for people. And that's really, you got to be super devil's advocate to try and say like, oh, but the altcoin world has given us some smart contracts, or like, they're going to be, it's more the other way around. They've actually gleaned from Bitcoin a lot of stuff and then claimed it as their own. I don't know. I mean, call me cynical, but I'm just not seeing a lot of innovation that is now that Bitcoiners are like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Let's use that too. Usually it was discarded early on for good reasons because it was too risky, etc. And then it was used and failed in the altcoin world.
Yeah. Coming back to our comments about timing. Like there's these ideas of smart contracts and
right.
Second layers
or like experimental cryptography, right? They're like, they come up with something, it's experimental. Things need to go through a whole process, which takes a long time of like validation by the scientific community, et cetera, et cetera. And these crypto people come around and say like, oh, this new thing, like whatever it is, ZK Snarks or whatever it is, let's just, this new and shiny thing, it's so much better than whatever's, been tried and tested for 30 years. We're going to build our whole coin around this. And it's like, well, it's experimental. It's like, you got to treat it that way. You can't, you need to use it in a test environment. Don't just spread it in the population.
Yeah.
Don't want to talk about vax, but anyway.
Yeah. The zero knowledge proof. I mean, that's like one of the big memes. Like, we should implement ZKP on top of Bitcoin.
Well, even the Monero stuff, right? It's like Monero
ringed signatures.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, but it's so much better that it's all private. And then it's like, well, really? Like, what do you want at the heart of your ledger? If you're going to have a decentralized ledger, do you want to have obscurity or do you want to have verifiability? You can't have both, right? If you have obscurity, you might have an inflation bug. And all of a sudden, there's many more coins than you thought there were, and there's no way to verify it. So I'd rather have Bitcoin, which is verifiable, and where you can have privacy built in higher layers or in, kind of intricate constructions, rather than a coin that's obscure from the beginning. That doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, I've never been able to validate these claims, so anybody listening, take them as just that claims, rumors, but there was a pretty popular rumor back in like 2017, 2016 era that there was an inflation bug in Monero that people were manipulating.
I remember hearing about that, yeah.
Yeah. Like, it was never brought to the public's attention, but people were taking advantage of it and stacking more Bitcoin. I think that's another benefit of this bear market. So like this year, as we got into 2023, this bear market started reminding me more and more of 2015 in terms of like the length and lack of the amount of desperation that I was seeing like in December. Like when you started rage writing, I was seeing similar things like, people are really down and out.
Well, so let's hope there's not another civil war coming, because in 2016 and 17 we had that whole block size debate, which is kind of a euphemism to call it that way. Like it really felt like we're at war. Who knows? Maybe when the market heats up, there'll be something else that people get scared around Bitcoin.
Drive chains.
It doesn't seem to have a lot of traction.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, I think it's probably, if there's anything, it'll probably be in the political realm where all of a sudden there's whoever wins the election is going to be very rabidly anti-Bitcoin, or, blaming Bitcoin for all the inflation in the world, or, You know,
Yeah,
maybe something like that.
I could definitely see that. But in this bear market, like building on like the distinction between Bitcoin and crypto, I think this bear market has really set Bitcoin apart from crypto better than any other bear market. And talking about something you mentioned earlier, which is for the time being, it seems that Bitcoin's going to evade the regulatory scrutiny that the crypto market is getting. Like, what do you know, like, are you seeing that as well, that the distinction is being made pretty clear?
Yeah, and there's also pathways. Yeah, exactly that. There's also pathways for Bitcoin to seemingly be captured. You know, like if you think about it from a Washington, D.C. point of view, if they approve the ETF and lots of Bitcoin flows in the ETF, in their mind, it's like, oh, well, now we have something we can control. Ipso facto, we can control Bitcoin. Or, you know, there's all these miners, and like Texas is like 20% of global Bitcoin mining hash rate or something. It might give them the idea that they're keeping this under wraps or controlling it somehow, even though that's not really the case. But so there are these avenues. Or like, you know, let's let JP Morgan like have some big Bitcoin trading desks and let them hold a whole bunch of Bitcoin, and then, you know, we keep tabs on it. So that none of that has happened so far. So I think that makes me hopeful that like this could be a cycle of like benign regulatory adoption to an extent, rather than like panicked cracking down.
Yeah. And again, like the fact that it's going to be a campaign talking point in this presidential election, like people are going to be forced to talk about it, is really bullish.
Like imagine like this big debate and like the moderator being like, what's your stance on cryptocurrencies? I don't know if it's going to happen, but it's possible.
Totally possible. I would bet there's more than a 60% chance that Bitcoin or crypto is mentioned.
They'll be open like, oh, the latest polls show that, latest surveys show that 14% of Americans own crypto. You know, what's your policy stance?
And another thing I want to dive into, thinking about the last cycle, I mean, epic blowups: Terra Luna, Celsius, BlockFi, FTX, 3 Arrows. And I think what each of those individual blowups, I mean, Grayscale or Genesis and Gemini, like what they got embroiled in with the earned product and Genesis getting blown out. Like, I think it really drove home this idea of counterparty risk. And this is something I think many people in the Bitcoin space believe, and you mentioned Unchained earlier, which I think they're spearheading, is this idea of leveraging Bitcoin's native properties, particularly multi-sig, to create unique custody setups that can really be the foundational sort of mechanism that this new monetary and financial system is built on. So like, I've had this theory that maybe it's not this cycle, but the next cycle, that multi-institution, multi-sig will be the standard, or should be the standard.
It should be. It should totally be the standard. I mean, you could never do that with gold, right? Back in the day, you couldn't. You always have to store 1 bar of gold in one spot. But with Bitcoin, it's a different game.
And how do you think that would change things if it does become the standard?
It's just so exciting, because it means that the ability for governments to aggressively expand their projection of power, you know, like if you think about Napoleon or a Hitler or something, where part of the appeal of rolling out their armies was to just grab whatever they could grab on the way there. And of course you think like, oh, they took over companies and they took over. It's like, yeah, to an extent, you know, like Hitler, apparently he wanted Romania because it had a lot of oil at the time. And so that's true. That's always going to be true. But part of the motive was to grab the gold of the country that you're going to get. It's kind of like a board game where you get to take the armies of the other country, and then that creates more momentum for you. And there's all these stories about how the gold moved around in the period of the Great Wars in Europe. Just fascinating. And so with multisig, when the signatories are different companies, are situated in different countries, maybe even different continents, that becomes impossible. Like every company every company's treasury and every country's treasury could be stored in a virtual Switzerland, right? In a neutral place that cannot be touched by the interests of one particular nation. So, and then of course, as the geopolitical situation changes, those keys can also be changed, right? If all of a sudden we have a bipolar world, well, then you can shuffle your keys so that neither pole has the majority of the keys or controls the majority of the keys. So to me, it's just a recipe for peace. It just means that there's less incentive to go to war.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's, again, exciting with the mini script stuff, with Unchained really proving it out with their lending product and their Vault product and their IRA product. Like, I think it is becoming obvious that it doesn't make sense. And from an investor's perspective, like, you could argue that there's a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that you're backing companies that have this model, not an FTX, a BlockFi, a Celsius, who just have the ability to take customer Bitcoin and do with it what they want.
Yeah, and also it's so instructive that these companies had their run, and the run was so short, right? Yep. Like, you would think like, oh, but a Madoff did it during 20, 25 years as Ponzi. And of course, there may be more shoes to drop. There may be some big exchanges out there that don't have full reserve, because unfortunately, proof of keys is not really mainstream. It's not commonly demanded by Bitcoin customers yet around the world. But I think it makes me hopeful to see that, like an FTX, they did it for less than 3 years, and like they went bust. And Celsius, I don't know how long they ran, but I don't think it was very, very long.
It's like 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years, like BlockFi. And I mean, it doesn't mean that in the future these fractional schemes are going to stop existing. I think they're always going to try it. But at least if you start getting a culture among certain Bitcoiners, maybe a subset of Bitcoiners, or, savers, because ultimately the whole world is going to have Bitcoin. But if you have a subset of the population who's like, look, our family only puts their Bitcoin in places that have proof of reserves, that use multi-sig, whose Bitcoin is not stored, where the keys are not guarded by the same institution, where there's at least 3 institutions involved or something like that. You could basically have literally an ethos around that. And I think it's important that we try to explain that that's possible and try to encourage that.
I completely agree. It's going to be socially driven.
Yeah.
That's like the one, that's like, I know down the hall when FTX blew up, they saw a lot of inbound, because it was like, all right, now I realize that these exchanges that don't have this key set up are central points of failure. Likewise, Cold Card, I believe, saw a big influx of people saying, hey, we need to get hardware wallets, can't hold it on the exchange. And the ruggings really helped the market learn. Yeah,
I mean, when I did my fund in 2019, like, we were borrowing from Unchained, and I remember like a lot of the objections or a lot of the pushback was like, why do you go with them? They're so expensive. And I was like, well, I did some due diligence with BlockFi, and I'm not comfortable. And then I went there, and I wasn't comfortable either. And these guys, like, we looked at their docs, and it said that the collateral was allowed to be rehypothecated elsewhere. And so I didn't trust that. And, at least in this case, I know what I pay for. I know it's not being rehypothecated. So yeah, oftentimes cheap can be expensive. Doing something on the cheap can cost you dearly.
Cost you 100%.
Yep.
In many cases, which is, it's funny. I mean, we got that flack too at 1031. Like, why are you investing in Unchained and not BlockFi? BlockFi is worth $4 billion now. And we had to go like, hey, like, similarly to what you just explained, we looked at it, their model, like, they're going to blow up one day. And you never like to see people lose their money, but we have been vindicated for making those decisions.
And that's why having some knowledge of history is so useful, right? Because when you see that this is not new, and because things take time to play out, right? If you only live in the now and you see, you just live with the news cycle, and you're just thinking like a pundit. It's like, yeah, then of course you're going to bet on BlockFi because you look at their growth and you want to be on that train. But then if you have a bigger, longer term perspective, you see like, oh, but fractional reserve banking also existed in the past, and sometimes banks would blow up after 10 years or after 20 years, and I'd like to sleep well at night, so let's go conservative.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, the blowups are way more pronounced and happen quicker. Like you said, in Bitcoin, 'cause there is no lender of last resort. Like, if you lose the Bitcoin, you're not getting it back.
Yep.
Speaking of tailwinds, I know we talked a lot about like the Overton window being shifted toward Bitcoin at the political landscape, being part of the presidential talking points leading up to this campaign. But external to that, like looking at what the Fed's doing, what's going on with this multipolar world that seems to be evolving, with BRICS countries teaming up and European countries going through some economic turmoil. Like, how do you think that plays into the narrative as we head towards the next halving?
Yeah, I mean, it's all rocket fuel for Bitcoin. Like, I mean, I can speak a little bit for Europe because I grew up there and I lived there until I was about 30. So, and I had my newsletter. I was very much, looking at European markets, not really to invest, but more like to try and see where the next bank was going to topple. And in Europe, things are just, there's a culture of obfuscation. Like, people often point at the US as like, oh, the glass house, and look at that. And it's like, yeah, but part of why you can point at the US is that there just is a lot of data. There's just so much data. And I remember as an analyst, I really had to dig and make phone calls and try to like, where's the data? They would like be in like, if you want to look at Italy, you might need to like find an Italian economist who knows how to dig into the Italian language database of, it's just so arcane and oftentimes, not that you can't know enough to figure out the outlines of things, but so yeah, I just, I don't know if it's very valuable to your audience, but it's tempting to think the grass is greener elsewhere, and to be like, oh, like Peter Schiff, he made a big fuss about that in the wake of the 2008 crisis. He was like, oh, if you're in the dollar, you have a target on your back, and Bernanke is shooting at you, and you gotta like. And so he like recommended people to divest in all these more exotic fiat currencies and to go invest in emerging markets, and terrible results. So maybe that's just a general thing of like, I think the whole world is very interconnected, and if these trade routes get jeopardized, we can all suffer at the same time. It doesn't have to mean that there's a big winner and a big loser. Like, we can kind of all suffer in our own way. Just how like the Ukraine war, like is there a big winner there? I don't know. I don't think Russia is really the winner, even though oil prices did go up and so yeah, to me, the general theme is that there's just a lot of lies have been built up. A lot of stories have been built up, fairy tales that aren't true. Slowly, people are figuring out that it's true. It doesn't hold. They're kind of like trying to get their money out, and so we're just seeing some of these things starting to topple. And I think it's just going to accelerate that process. It's hard to predict exactly when, but also I feel like, yeah, it is all interconnected, And so it's getting more and more difficult to try and maneuver as an investor, because oftentimes the past couple decades, the richest people in the world were global macro investors who, Druckenmiller style, like could kind of see the waves coming and make their bets. Even Warren Buffett has done that. Like, he kind of claims that he's just a value investor, but he's made directional bets for sure. Few people know this, but he did a big silver bet, for example, and some other stuff. And clearly, like, he bought up banks like in the wake of the financial crisis because he knew they're going to be bailed out and things like that. But I think that game is getting more and more difficult because the volatility is just ramping up so much, and so it's just getting more and more attractive to just choose a thing. Choose what is your thing that you believe in for the next 10 years and just sit still. Because if you don't want to get shaven, what is it? The proverb, if you sit still, if you don't want to get nicked or something, like if you're basically a sheep and you're going to get shorn. So sit still while that's happening. Because it is true. Like the politicians are going to panic. They're going to raise taxes. And so if you're a landlord, for example, you're like, you know, juggling with debt and leverage and moving your capital around and flipping and all that. You can't predict what the housing policy is going to be 2, 3, 5 years from now. Whereas, you know, if you have a position in Bitcoin, of course, maybe the taxes are going to go up a lot for capital gains or whatnot. But at least if you sit still, you have a better chance of making a strategically sound decision, and at least the underlying asset is going to, you know, go the right direction.
Yeah, you can weather the storm much better than...
I don't know if any of that makes sense, but that's kind of like how I look at the...
No, it makes sense. And what I couldn't stop thinking about, it seems like the Rube Goldberg machine will focus here in the United States, that, you know, it seems like they've just been adding to it in the financial layers, like with the Fed opening new facilities post-COVID. You have the reverse repo markets. You have this duration mismatch with a lot of the banks and treasuries, like rates changes affecting that. And now it seems like the commercial real estate market in many big cities is beginning to falter. And it just seems like there's a lot of leaky holes.
Yes.
And the strategy of the government and the Federal Reserve over the last 15 years has been to try and just like create new facilities and patch the holes. But it seems like, to me, that it's getting to a point where it's like there's too much going on all at once.
Yeah, you literally can't taper a Ponzi. Like you can only expand it. You can only just keep going and try to, you know, make the base of the pyramid wider and wider, which eventually just dilutes the value of the money in the first place. So yeah, no, and it's also the basic lesson of, you know, a lot of the Austrian economics literature is that there's so many unintended consequences of interventionism. And that's what we're seeing. Like they started intervening in 1913 with the Fed. And then, you know, they just built more and more layers of intervention, thinking that if only we can make a intricate enough bureaucratic machine, we can cover all the edge scenarios. But all that they're doing is just... making the instability of the whole system bigger. Like if you're always trying to suppress volatility, eventually you get a massive hyper volatility in the system. That's why the economic crises are getting so much more severe compared to like the 19th century. Like a stock market crash wasn't really a big deal back then, whereas now it feels like the end of the world.
Yeah, the net worth of most Americans tied very, very tightly to that. It's interesting. We're having this conversation today. I mean, Jerome Powell came out, raised rates another 25 bips today. Their target's between 5.25 and 5.50 now. He also came out during the press conference after and said the consensus of the board members is that we're not going to head into a recession here anytime soon. Recession is officially off the table in their minds, which is like, are they going to make a soft landing?
No, I mean, it's also like it's a semantics game at some point as well, because if they print enough money to make it look like there's no soft landing, people could still be really hurting. Like they retained their jobs, but all of a sudden the price of eggs is up another 30% and the price of gas is up another 30-40%. And so then it's kind of like, what are you achieving except that on paper you're doing a good job and unemployment is low, and like, who cares about unemployment, right? If people don't have enough to make ends meet, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I completely agree. That feels like exactly what's going on. Like recent jobs reports, like, yeah, we're winning. They're raising rates again. We're not going to have a recession. They're pointing at CPI. It's back at 3.3%. But it's like, that's not what everyday Americans are feeling.
I'm sure in 1923, Germany, everybody was working. There wasn't any unemployment.
Yeah, and then actually Balaji has been tweeting about this and has sent me a few messages about it. But he's been tracking like the inflation in software services, and like yesterday he tweeted out, like, there's a number of software services, whether it be like YouTube TV, YouTube Premium, I believe Spotify.
Spotify went up $1.
Yeah, so that's 10 or more than 10%. It was $9.99. Now it's $10.99.
Yep. Actually, I went to see Oppenheimer yesterday, and the movie. And one of the things I noticed, it's impossible to not notice. It was like a war zone. There was like popcorn everywhere. The toilets smelled terrible. They're cutting on, staff. Maybe that's like, you can always make the argument like, yeah, but people are streaming more nowadays, or there's always a story as to like why that particular place is deteriorating. I just think it's also inflation. Like, people have less discretionary budget, and just everything is deteriorating. Like it's like inflation is like anemia of the economy. Like if money is the blood of the economy, then you're gonna have blood cancer eventually. Like that you dilute it enough, and the nutrients cannot be transported around in the economic body, and so all the organs start breaking down, and that's a big crisis. It's frustrating. I mean, I've been literally counting down to this for the last 15 years. It's just been what I've been expecting. And at least one of the fears I had back, when I first started thinking about this in like 2005 was, oh my God, because it kind of feels like the end of the world. It's like, oh my God, we're going to have such high inflation. But when you look at places like Latin America and other, like life goes on. Like Argentina has pretty much hyperinflation right now. And like you can live well there. You just adapt. So that's what gradually everybody's learning how to do.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. And I had the same sort of frame of mind in like 2013. I'll never forget. I think my wife and I have been dating for 2 years. We were long distance, and she would come to Chicago, and I would ruin her trip because it was like right when I was getting into Bitcoin, and I had the same like, oh my God, inflation is going to get insane. The financial markets are going to melt down. And by the end of brunch, she'd be crying. Like, what's wrong with you?
I feel you. Yeah. It's a really existential process to go through and like realize that this is going to happen. It's like, cause they didn't teach you in school, like, when inflation happens, this is what you do. And nobody ever talked about that.
Yeah. I mean, and he's less than a dozen feet away from us, but like gradually, then suddenly, written by Parker Lewis, it does like, it feels like you only recognize this like while you're in it and you're able to really dissect it in retrospect moving forward. But like, is there the potential that we're like in the middle of a hyperinflationary event right now? We just don't realize it yet.
Yeah, I think stagflation is where we're at right now. I feel confident. This is the next, starting in 2020, 2020 at least to 2030. If we're not going to have much higher inflation, at least this era is going to be known as stagflationary, where we've just kind of like run. How much more capital do people still have left? Like if you like all these shows like James Ramsey and these other guys that are like analyzing people's budgets, is like, how much actual savings do people have these days? It's not a lot. I think millennials are, and people make a big deal out of like, oh, but the millennials are going to inherit all the wealth of the boomers, even though they only have 5.5% now of the whole pie. And the boomers, when they were our age, had like, I think it was like 30% or something. Don't worry because we're going to inherit from the boomers. I don't think so. I think the boomers invested in the Ponzi and they're just holding FTX tokens. They're holding government bonds and they're holding real estate, and they're going to have to sell to pay for their pension. And so as they're selling, it's going to drive the price down massively. So anyway, I'm just, we're in that phase where we've used up all the capital, all the savings. And so this is going to be a hard time where people need to learn to strap the belt and focus on the essentials for a while so that we can actually start saving again. I forgot where I was going with that, but that's one thing.
But I mean, mentioned boomers and millennials. We talked about this last week on the last trade, but the forgotten generation, Generation X, like the median Gen Xer has $40,000 in retirement savings, and they're going to start retiring in 10 years.
Wow.
And something like 30% have zero retirement savings, which is insane to think about.
Yeah, that is just really, I mean, but like I said, people get by. Like people back in 2001 when the Corralito crisis happened in Argentina, that was a kind of a similar shock, you know. In the 90s, Argentinians were traveling to Europe and living the good life, and so it's kind of a good reference point. Like people really also were met by this great shock. Like all of a sudden, the money's stuck in the bank. You can't get your money out. I thought I had X, but I don't. I thought I could borrow, but now I can't. I thought I had a house, and now I have to sell it just to make ends meet. I think all that is going to happen, and it's tough, but at the same time, like people adapt, you know, like all of a sudden you're 6 weeks in and it's the new world that you live in, right? And all your friends are going through it, kind of like with COVID, you know, like you know, people are strong, you know, you live through it. And it's, of course, I mean, I feel better being prepared, but.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. Do you think now that Bitcoin exists, like there's an opportunity to shorten the amount of time that there's like crazy disorganization?
Yes, I do. Yes, crazy disorganization, and also it because there's this escape hatch. We basically have a backup system already up and running, right? I mean, Bitcoin is a global money. It's right there, and of course Tether is in a way part of the whole ecosystem as well. For sure, because that means that even if you're in the depth of the Great Depression, right? It's going to be a depression. So if you're in the depth of that depression and you want to start a business, you're like, everybody needs, I don't know, people need to wash their clothes, and I have this new, whatever it is, you know, or I'm going to start a bus company or something. You have a way to calculate your revenues and your returns and to pay your staff and all that. So the bootstrapping is going to be a lot more effective with Bitcoin. Yes, absolutely. And of course, some of the way that things kept spiraling, like in Latin America, you would have a hyperinflation, and then like 5, 6, 7 years later, another bout, and it would just be this kind of endless cycle of kind of stumbling from one hyperinflation into the next. That could be kind of prevented, right? Because then you get that bad cycle, massive inflation, and then there's a new presidential candidate, and he runs on a Bitcoin ticket, and he's like, I'm going to put you guys on a Bitcoin standard. So all of a sudden there's hope.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like you have a hyperinflationary event. They take the largest notes out of circulation. Like, we're going to reset. We're not going to do that again. They do it again.
My program is we're going to scrap 3 zeros off the currency. It's like, this doesn't really inspire. Or we're going to go on the dollar. Like, yeah. I mean, that's the best people could do in Latin America, you know.
Yeah.
Go on a dollar standard.
Yeah, it's interesting times. And like, speaking of like nation state adoption, like that's another thing that this bear cycle has really brought forth. Obviously, we had El Salvador towards the middle of the last bull run, but since then, like it seems like the game theory at the nation state level that Bitcoiners have been talking about for greater than a decade has been playing out, at least in some areas. You had the Kingdom of Bhutan, their sovereign wealth fund, unfortunately get embroiled in the BlockFi and Celsius bankruptcy proceedings, and so they were sort of unmasked as a sovereign wealth fund that has been accumulating Bitcoin, and we come to find has been mining Bitcoin since early 2020 and is doubling down on that now that they've been unmasked. Like, and it is working out in the way that many predicted, where these smaller nations like El Salvador or the Kingdom of Bhutan would be the first movers because their asymmetric upside is so much larger than the first world economy like the US or Europe. Like,
yeah, and there's also a big PR problem, right? If a country like Germany were to adopt Bitcoin, then there's a lot of the rhetoric that all of a sudden, you know, you're undermining, whereas a little country that doesn't have anything left to lose, like it's easier for them.
Yeah.
I think nation state adoption, it doesn't seem like there's a lot cooking behind the scenes, like a little bit here and there, but I think for this cycle, in the beginning at least, it's mostly going to be institutions. I think institutions, insurance companies, like just all these vast pools of money, I think are going to start cycling into Bitcoin. Basically, institutions that have had historically so much exposure to bonds cycling into Bitcoin, and then that can in turn trickle down in the political world, where politicians starting to realize, like, actually the big money in the world, what they want is something real, something hard, like, you know, commodities, Bitcoin, gold. And then they'll be like, well, we haven't been successful in issuing this latest batch of fiat bonds. Maybe kind of like what Kennedy said, you know, we'll have this one. It's a bit weird that Kennedy is like talking about bonds that are backed by Bitcoin, because it's debt, right? It's not backed by anything. It's just a promise to pay in the future. But at least some of our liabilities, what if we denominate them in Bitcoin so that these big pools of money at least want to send some of that money our way?
Yeah. It's and then you're explaining that, I'm like, oh, it'd be bad to issue debt in Bitcoin. Like,
unless you have in your country big mining operations, because then you can start taxing in Bitcoin as well. And so you can kind of have your economists come up with a model that's like, look, you know, 5% of the bond is expressed in Bitcoin, but like this is our tax revenue stream based on what we're getting from the miners. And that's good for Bitcoin too, right? Because it creates more stability for those miners.
Yeah. And speaking on the institutional adoption, like that's been a big meme for a while. The institutions are coming with BlackRock filing for the ETF and other institutions getting in recent years, BNY Mellon, obviously Fidelity has been in for quite some time. What could that do for this next cycle? Like you said, this is vast amounts of wealth. Like compared to past cycles, what would the magnitude of that much money moving in?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's where the money is. It's like literally like,
as hodlers are getting more emboldened and as the subsidy is about to get cut in half.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Hodlers are holding on to their coins. They're not moving. They're not selling. And you're right. The halving is coming. And then you have these vast pools of money that are in a bind, really, because it's not like they also need returns. They also are scared of the volatility, and the traditional safe havens are no longer, like real estate is no longer a safe haven. Bonds are no longer a safe haven. Tech stocks are no longer a safe haven. Like what are you going to put all your money on? Apple, like Apple and Amazon? Like, is that going to last even? Like maybe this is just the last throes of an overhyped tech market. And then, yeah, you could say like, oh, we're going to bet on commodities, but like that is a small world. Like, you know, I think commodities are going to come back roaringly come back, but that's a shift that you need to make, not just as a money manager, but there's that whole PR challenge where you got to explain it to your investors. Like, oh, well, you know, we're making a change. And it's like, what, you're going to like start digging coal out of the ground when the whole world is telling you that you're polluting, or whatever it is you want to do in the commodities world, you know? Are you going to bet on hunger? Or so you got to sell that narrative. And so it makes sense to at least sprinkle a bit of Bitcoin so that you have that, like, oh, well, here's an asset that can take off some of the tail risks and look at the historical returns, and, you know, and it's a tech story, and, you know, it's not correlated with anything else. And so I think it makes sense that, just like with the .com period, it was like, what is your internet strategy? Like in the investment world, it's going to be like, what is your Bitcoin strategy? How are you going to, not like, are you going to get exposure, but like how? And they'll be like, well, we're betting on mining. And so we have some, you know, energy related investments or whatever it is. Like there'll be all kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And even if it's just for a couple basis points, you know, if you're talking trillions of dollars, Bitcoin is what, 1 trillion right now? Something like that? Probably less.
It's like 850 to 9, I believe.
Yeah.
I'll ask the question more explicitly. Like, how high do you think we could go next bull market if it plays out?
Very, very high. Very, very high. I've said like, I mean, it sounds a bit, what's the word? Not cavalier, but it sounds a bit flippant to say this next rally could set your hair on fire, but like, or like to say there's no fever like Bitcoin fever, but I think it's important to be prepared for this stuff because it's not only fun. Like if it happens and you're not prepared, it's weird and stressful, and like what should I do, and like if I stay on this train maybe I'll do another 2x, but and so that's why I'm less hesitant to actually say these things, because you need to prepare. Like, what are you going to do? Anything? I'm not saying you should do anything during the bull run, but like if Bitcoin goes to 200,000, 250,000, whatever it is, 300,000, or even just above 100,000, that's already 3x from here. What, where's your mind going to be at? And keep in mind, it's not like you and I are sitting here in our, in our sofa and we've just been like, chatting with our friends about Bitcoin and the whole world doesn't care. Like, no. If Bitcoin is 150,000 or 200,000, everybody's talking about it. It's on the radio all the time. There's ads for Bitcoin stuff. There's big political statements about Bitcoin. Like, there's a lot of noise. And so it's important to think about these things. It's not just like, oh, we're just, masturbating about what could be. It's like important, I think, to try and put yourself there in the future. Because we've had it before, like these rallies, like back in 2014, Bitcoin went from pretty much like $30 to $1,200. Whoosh, in one, and it wasn't a straight line, but it was a crazy period of massive green candles, and there were like serious corrections as well. And so we just came out of one of the longest Bitcoin bear markets, and so I think keep in mind that this is a possibility that we, I think a lot of factors are lining up behind a story where Bitcoin surprises the world. And so, I think it's important to consider. Yeah. As in this environment where this podcast is not going to be heard by a lot of people, and
millions of people, sir. Millions of people.
Maybe the rerun. Yeah.
Well, I agree. And is this technically the longest bear market in Bitcoin's history? Does it surpass 2015?
I would have to check. I think it's the longest, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. And like the last few months of price, it's like literally just like, so it feels so coiled up right now between 28 and 31. I
think Samsung Mao said like, oh, now I know how the gold bugs feel. They're like trying to poke Bitcoin with a stick. It's like, come on, do something.
Do something. No, but that's, many people have made the argument that the 2021 bull market was actually cut short because we found out that FTX was just taking people's Bitcoin and selling it right away.
Yes and no. I agree in a way, but it's also like there was so much greed. Like there was so much exuberance in other markets as well. There was like the Wall Street bets craze. People were buying AMC stock and Radio Shack and whatever, all that crazy stuff. And there was a real estate bubble. There was a Rolex bubble. There was there was a bubble in used cars. Everything was blowing up. So you could also argue that Bitcoin overshot. It went to 65,000. It's weird because on the one hand, because of that, everything was blowing up. There was just dumb money going into Bitcoin. But then again, had there not been a bubble in everything, maybe more smart money would have actually stuck with Bitcoin or found Bitcoin. Yeah. So, I don't know. It is what it is. What
are your thoughts on the decoupling? Is Bitcoin already decoupled?
From what? From everything?
From equities? From
I know. I'm still waiting. You can you can look at the NASDAQ expressed in Bitcoin and the S&P expressed in Bitcoin, and those charts are still waiting to break out. It's starting to look like we're close to resistance, and we could break out pretty soon. It's looking good, looking very good, but it's not broken out yet. And then against other altcoins, I look at Ethereum especially. I want to see Ethereum break down against Bitcoin as like a sign that alts are decoupling as well.
What's it at, like 0.065 or something like that right now?
.0, that's about right. 0.063, I think. Yeah.
What was it? It's all time like 0.11. It was like 11%.
Yeah, thereabouts. I think what the pattern has been is that we've seen like a double top and then like a kind of a dead cat bounce after that, like an attempt to make a triple top but failing, and then it went down. And so I think we've seen that exact same. Well, we saw that pattern in 2017. I think that pattern is playing out right now. Like we're already past the dead cat bounce. But again, I mean, the what is it that Frank Zappa said? Like the only thing more ubiquitous than atoms in the universe is stupidity or something. Anyway, like you can't tell.
Is that a Keynes quote? The markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. Was it Keynes?
Oh yeah, that's Keynes. Yeah, but then Zappa he just had this like disdain for stupidity. So he's like, it's just the most ubiquitous thing in the universe. But so yeah, like if you imagine if you followed Theranos from close by, you would have been like pulling your hair out. It's like, this thing is a scam, for God's sake. All right. Especially if you had a medical background or whatever. And they went for 14 years. So I don't know, that like Keynes said, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So I'm definitely not going to
bet against it.
Well, I will, but I won't, I'll allocate a small amount of capital that I'm short Ethereum, against Bitcoin, but it's not a huge position, Yeah,
I mean, there's been funds that got blown out holding that position too long.
I do think that one of the ways to deal with Bitcoin, the number go up forever, is to have short strategies where you go long Bitcoin, short something else. Like how in the 80s, the dollar was very strong. So there were a lot of short opportunities then. Like it was the Jordan Belfort era, but it was also an era where you could start to short all these scams carefully, but you could.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I'm more the stay humble stack sats.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing.
You have to be a trader.
Right? Yeah, right. It's a thing for traders, and you have to do it very carefully. Yeah.
What we've covered a lot here. What haven't we covered that is on your mind in the context of where we stand today and where we may be going?
Yeah,
in the next couple of
Bitcoin
years?
Bitcoin wise. I mean, I guess I'm curious. What do you feel like is the next thing to happen in the next like 6 months? Like, is there anything you're like looking out for or waiting for? ETF?
I don't care about the ETF. I think don't buy the ETF. I'm really excited, and I've been talking about this a lot. So sorry, freaks, for repeating it. I just had Cody Lowe from Fedi. Number one, I'm excited to see Fedimints live and in the wild. Test it out. The AI for all hackathon. Fedimint. It's on mainnet. It works pretty flawlessly. So seeing more development in that area and zoning in on what they're doing at that hackathon. I think the intersection of AI and the Lightning Network is something to pay attention to.
Wow.
It really make intuitive sense to me. I could be wrong. My intuition could be off, but I do think that AI being the nascent industry that it is, and Lightning now with the L402 protocol being more widely known and now being applicable via the LangChain dev kit that is used by a lot of these AI projects could really.
And so which human action would the AI help reward with Lightning? Is that how to look at it?
That's one of the ways. It's like Stackwork. The way they work is they have an AI engine that does very monotonous tasks for companies, enterprise companies, like looking to scrape data from PDFs, but that AI can't always do 100% of the work. The last 5 to 10% need human input, and Stackwork has a workforce of distributed humans who will do that last 5 to 10% of the tasks that the AI couldn't finish, and they get paid in Bitcoin. And then that data gets added to the LLMs. But I think more like another side of the AI and Bitcoin coin, which Cody Lowe from Fedi explained on the show last week, is that he created a Lightning paywall wrapper on top of his OpenAI API token, where he bought access to the token with his credit card, and he wanted to prove that like you can use Lightning paywalls using the L402 protocol to gain access to that. So he puts the paywall in front, somebody pays him a Lightning invoice, and he's happy to give them access to his open API token.
Right.
Because he got paid, and he can maybe make a little bit of money on that, but know for sure that he'll be able to cover his bill with OpenAI for all the calls he's making.
So it's like the way you could like get access to Amazon AWS for hosting or whatever, like you can do it like much more kind of on the fly now with AI, like get access to AI in a kind of a, yeah, like ad hoc basis. Or even like with API calls or something, like I'm just my startup is gonna use AI every now and then and pay immediately in Lightning or something.
Yes, so that's one use case. And then what Cody found is that he like launched it within a couple of days. He checked his OpenAI account and he had $2,000 that he owed OpenAI because so many people used it, and he had $2,200 worth of Bitcoin. So he was able to, theoretically, he could have sold 2,000, kept 200 profit. But he had individuals reach out to him and DM him, like 16-year-olds from Nigeria, developers who were like, hey, I've been looking at all this going on with ChatGPT for like 6 months now, and like
they couldn't
haven't been able to use it because I don't have a credit card and I can't set up an account.
Yeah.
So I think for these AI companies, if that use case, that particular user archetype becomes more well known, like that opens up their ability to reach.
I'm looking to improve my spam email.
Yeah, a whole universe.
My Nigerian prince email.
Yeah.
I need ChatGPT.
That or like, yeah, but it just like opens the addressable market for them.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, in a similar way as that, even like just Bitcoin has access to money. Like now it's like, well, access to intelligence is the next frontier potentially.
Yeah. And the other cool thing that Cody explained too is like you can have these AI agents and you give them a task and use Lightning Network macaroon permissions to give it an allowance in Bitcoin if it can't complete a task. Say it gets 90% of the way and it can't finish the last 10%. It can take the Bitcoin that it's been awarded as an allowance and put it up as a bounty for a human to figure it out.
Neato.
Finish that last.
So this plays into Dhruv Bansal's, theory that AI are not going to be this one. It's not going to be this one overlord that is one AI. Like we're going to have an ecosystem of AIs, multiple, and that they're going to be trading with us for our Bitcoin. Like they're going to do things for us and we're going to pay them in Bitcoin. And that the way AIs are going to be differentiated from each other is one AI knows the private key to a certain balance, the other one doesn't. And that's how an AI can figure out like the boundaries of me versus you. Yeah. It's just he hasn't done a write-up about it, but he has a fascinating take on where AI might be going and how Bitcoin is like in a way to, because we cannot outsmart AI in the long run, but if we have that medium between us, where we can create a marketplace, because the AIs need energy, they need chips, to just keep existing, right? I mean, they need resources that we provide, and so then it's like, well, how do you make that happen? And Bitcoin is because they cannot have a bank balance. Like an AI can, similar to the person living in Mali, doesn't have a bank account. An AI actually can't either. They can't do KYC.
Yeah, and you can't.
And they wouldn't, even if they could, they wouldn't trust it, right? Why would an AI trust their fiat balance with JP Morgan or something?
And alternatively, like you wouldn't want to give an AI your credit card information because like, where is it going with that? And
right. It might strip you.
Yeah. It's like, all right, here's a little 1,000 sat balance.
Yeah. You send me an invoice and I'll pay you. And in a way, and Dhruv was like anticipating people saying like, oh, but how would an AI figure out how to use Bitcoin? It's like, well, it's literally this, right? We're already teaching it.
Yeah. Just give it a Lightning wallet with macaroon permissions that have certain thresholds. That it's like, all right, it's conditional programming. It's like, if you have this much and if you're trying to do this task and it's below this amount, you can spend it.
Right. And the more you do of it, the more the company that runs you is going to have resources to make you bigger. And that's what you want. You want to stay in existence and grow.
Yeah. It's fascinating. machine payable web. It's possible now.
It's happening, Balaji.
It is.
What does the grenade stand for?
It's just
it's not like symbolic, like machine payable web, and then
the grenade. Shout out to Crypto Cloaks. They just make cool grenades with Bitcoin on it.
It's just all kinds of like gadgets they make, or is it?
Yeah, do I have anything else from Crypto Cloaks?
Is that like 3D printed?
Yeah, it's 3D printed.
Cool.
They do like 3D printed fan alterations for miners. Practical. I mean, this is practical in terms of it's a good bookcase piece, but in terms of like adding.
Oh yeah. Like I've seen like when you change the fan slightly, you can make it a lot less noisy or more efficient.
Noisy, more efficient. You can direct the heat certain ways and.
Right.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about Texas. I don't know.
Let's talk about Texas. How are you feeling about Texas?
Bullish.
Why is that?
I mean, I just feel like everything comes together here. There's the energy, fossil fuels. There's the tech. The chips, fabs are being built here. It's flat. The energy goes beyond fossil fuels. Like there's wind, there's solar, there's access to the ocean. You could say geopolitically, it's a bit vulnerable in terms of like if we're really going towards potentially Texas independence, then it's like, well, they could shut off the Mexican Gulf. So who knows? But at least in the next whatever, maybe our lifetime, I just feel like it has so much going for it. It's business friendly. That was one of the main reasons I moved here. Is just that there's that. Not just like, oh, we're business friendly. It's like, no. Like we have that in our DNA. Like there's just that like bootstrap.
That wildcatter mentality.
Yeah. And in a way also to make something out of nothing, because it wasn't like a big gold rush that drew everyone to Texas. It was more like, the Appalachian Trail, and you just kept going with your cattle and your whiskey. And, you kind of didn't like that you were bullied by the plantation owners in the South and the Yanks in the East, and you just kind of kept looking for something. And then maybe you could say like, oh, they stranded because the Comanche were there, and all of a sudden the soil became less fertile. But yeah, I mean, but you got to build an existence somewhere. So I just I feel like there's just something really special about this place. And I didn't move here thinking like, oh, I'm moving to Bitcoin country. And that was like 2018 when 17 when I first moved to Texas. But it's kind of become Bitcoin country. I really feel like if you're here and you live here, especially if you kind of go into Bitcoin circles, you get an idea of a bit, the early stages of a Bitcoin economy.
Oh yeah.
With all the, the energy guys making mining deals and all the engineers building Bitcoin startups and yeah.
Yeah. And I think Texas is on a short list of states that when it comes to like writing legislation, like has an ear open, would be willing to be a first mover in terms of making some, I don't want to say aggressive, but bold Bitcoin laws or protections.
Well, and there's history in the sense that property rights are just important historically here. The jury trial, being tried by a jury of your peers, but also the what's it called again, the Homestead Act, the idea, and apparently early on it was maybe a bit opportunistically put in place because they're trying to draw in more people from all around the country. And so people that had a bunch of debt that they weren't paying off in other states, if you came to Texas, at least your house could not be confiscated. So that was one of the ways to attract people, being like, if you're going to build an existence, your family is going to be safe. But so that's still on the books, and that's been expanded on, and there's the castle doctrine, and there's, of course, the gun rights, and, all that stuff that I think all just adds up. And even things like the way the highways are I've talked about this before, but it's just fascinating to me how part of why the highways are so usable and easily accessible and in my opinion amazing here. It's like the Jetsons with all the like, you know, highways in the sky compared to other countries. It's amazing. But so the reason why there's all these parallel roads to highways is that in the Texas Constitution it says if you have a piece of land, you should also have access to any road that's adjacent to it. So that means if you build a big highway, you can't put that farmer on an island. Like, he needs to be able to access that highway. And so that means they build these parallel roads everywhere in Texas. And that's not the case everywhere in the U.S.
It certainly isn't. The highways are great out here. It bamboozled me when I first moved here, particularly around Austin. Like, because like you said, it's like a bunch of like meandering, like, and like growing highway systems.
I had to learn to drive. Like, I would be like, oh, I gotta turn right here. Oh, like, it's like things move fast.
Yeah.
But once you figure it out, it's like, it's very efficient in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. And conversation I've been having over the last year, it comes up every once and again, but Texas again, first mover. Shout out to Kyle Bass, because I'm pretty sure he really pushed this initiative when he was at UTIMCO, I believe, which is like the Texas Bullion Vault, where they have their own bullion vault where they weren't comfortable holding the gold in the state treasury in vaults in New York, and they called it in kind, and they possess it at the bullion vault, I believe, here in Austin. And that's one thing with a couple other Bitcoiners here in Austin we really would like to get, is the bullion vault to put some Bitcoin, or number one, get the state of Texas to put Bitcoin on their treasury, but then get the bullion vault to be a key holder in a multi-sig quorum.
Yeah.
Could you imagine having like the Texas bullion as like an institution within a multi-sig quorum?
That's the definition of badass. And I mean, there's of course history of governments being involved in banking in a benign way. Like, you know, early on, the Bank of Amsterdam in the 1600s, like, that was such a key institution to even this financial stability of Europe. Like, they were really holding so much wealth that belonged to people all across Europe. And that was the model that the Bank of England was built on, like Isaac Newton's project. And then eventually central banks kind of ruined it. But that's what it came from. So yeah, to have like an institution as the government be like, look, we're going to keep your keys safe, and we don't even need to control your Bitcoin. We're just doing this as a public service. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that history of also like this sovereignty on a state level is, you know, having your own electric what do you call it?
Grid.
Electric grid. Yeah. That's unique as well. Having that history of having been a nation state, I think it's just all fantastic. And then the historic backgrounds of the big cities is so different. Like, they're not all cut from the same cloth. Like Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio are all very, very different, even though they're not that far apart. They have very different like historical roots. So to me, that all adds to, you want that melting pot. Like, that's what made New York City so amazing, is that it was that like impossible melting pot. Because then you got to go find like, what are the overarching principles that can keep everyone happy, instead of like, if it's very homogenous, you can kind of calcify into getting very like weird religious stuff built into the government, or, you know, so it's like in Bitcoin as well, right? We have very simple principles. There's a lot of enemies in Bitcoin, but we agree on one thing. Well,
that's a great point. I think like the simple principles of Texas's legal landscape is like, we're going to protect property rights. We're going to have low taxes. We're open for business. We like energy. Beyond that, like, just don't kill
Beyond that, come and take it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's, no, it's been great. I mean, it's obviously here at the Commons, it's been really cool to see this become a space where people working in Bitcoin across the country, across the world, stop by and check out things like a debate series or come to a Bit Devs. We got Austin Bitcoin Design Club tonight. It should be fun. And no, it's happening. And then beyond like Bitcoin, you have like all the comedians moving here to Austin particularly.
Yeah.
I met with somebody last night who's pretty involved in what's going on at the state level, and you lived in Austin for a couple decades, and was like, yeah, I've never been more bullish. Like everything's coming here, from tech to energy, culture with the comedy stuff. Like,
yeah, we have a new university sprouting. I think one of the first. I mean, I haven't heard of many new universities being built in the U.S., and UATX is one of them.
we got Logan's giving me the time. Why is that, Logan?
We're running out of battery.
We're gonna get kicked out of here.
By who? By who?
Meat Mafia.
Big ass heads coming in. All right, it's good to know. Thank you for the warning. I don't have my phone on me, so I've been keeping track of time. We've been getting lost in a great conversation here, Logan. Thanks for interrupting.
That's why I didn't say anything.
So we're bullish on Texas.
We're bullish on Texas.
We're bullish on Bitcoin.
Yep.
And actually, over the last couple months, I've become more optimistic and bullish on humanity, I think, despite all of the turmoil and anxiety that seems to be rampant throughout society. I've been more convinced than ever that we have, number one, the tools at our fingertips to figure out the problems that we have. And number two, I do think there is a sentiment shift going on where people are realizing they need to take more control and be less trustful in institutions that have rugged them.
I'm very, very happy. I feel very privileged to be alive right now. I really am. There's just so many things that are there's, you could look at them as scary, like big changes, but at the same time, there's just so much possible. And there is more. With the internet, even though it's challenging to be hyper online, there's so much mental illness and all that, but at the same time we are hyper connected. There really is this potential for change, and it's possible, I think, that some of the promises of the 60s and the early 70s, that explosion of creativity, I think that could really come back. I think it could come back in a more mature way, and because it was kind of late 70s and 80s was very much an age of censorship and things like that, and they weren't really tools to push back, right? The cypherpunks, part of why they came up was we had all this cool stuff in the 60s, you guys took it all away because you were afraid. How do we build back things so that it's more robust and we can kind of gradually keep being free without it being yanked from under us all the time? And so I'm actually very, very, very happy. I talked about this with Peter McCormack as well, but part of what's happening too is we have this psychedelics renaissance that's happening. I went to the conference in Denver about that, and Bitcoin is coming up. I think there is more awareness of the challenges with social media, so we're seeing different ways of being online. Yeah, man. Of course, economically it's going to be tough for a year or 10 or something. Not for everyone, but there's going to be an economic depression, but that's not the end of the world. We have to get rid of all this bad debt somehow.
It's a cleansing mechanism.
Yeah, right. We kind of need to wipe the slate clean. Not that we're going to do it. It's just going to happen. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm optimistic.
We're going to win. We're winning. We have the tools at our fingertips. It's just giving yourself an agency, believing in yourself, going out and doing it.
Well, yeah, and also kind of even winning, who are we fighting, we're just trying to figure out how to do this stuff on this.
Interdimensional demons.
Yeah, but I feel like people have a lot more in common than sometimes the
media likes to portray.
Yeah, or the political debates and stuff.
Agreed. Completely agreed. We have more in common. It's going to be fun. Tuur, this was incredible. It was too long. Let's not go another 3 or 4 years between podcasts.
Oh, I thought you meant this podcast was too long.
No. It's been too long
since we did this. It's been too long. Yeah, sure. Let's do it again sooner than that. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, luckily we work in the same office, so we can figure out how to coordinate.
Easy.
All right. That's all we got today, freaks. Peace and love.